3:02, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Let me start by welcoming you all to this event. Thank you for joining us. This is the final event to recognize Black History Month. We really appreciate you taking the time to be here with us, to really show up for Black History Month. I'm Cheryl Staub French. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a professor of civil engineering and the Associate Dean of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And it's a pleasure to be kicking off this event today. I'm going to start by handing it off to my friend and colleague, Dana Lynn, to do our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Cheryl, and it's wonderful to be here today. I'm so grateful that we could easily pivot and be online. And we want to acknowledge that we are on unceded, ancestral, and traditional land of the Hunkaminam-speaking Musqueam, the people of the Rivergrass. For me, a land acknowledgement is really an exercise in legal plurality. It's a contractual relationship. We do the land acknowledgement first before we get into an agenda, before we get into the business of the meeting or the panel or the speaking thing, because we are asking implicitly to receive permission from the traditional ancestral owners of the land for the business we do in this space. And in return, we acknowledge the unceded state of the land. We recognize ourselves as uninvited guests or kin of the Musqueam. Both these things are really important. One cannot be without the other. Our understanding of position and place is really key. And the contract would be broken if it's only one-sided. So in our world, we are so busy and pursuing so many things at once. And one part of this land acknowledgement that is always important to me, it's really the importance of connection and relationality. And we want to spend this time thinking about our connection to the place that we live and do business. And we want to spend this time thinking about our relationship to each other, to the land, to the nature that is in our environment. And in order to do this, we step back from where we're at. We recognize that for millennia, Musqueam and their Coast Salish neighbors have lived, fished, harvested in these lands and waters. So I raise my hands in gratitude to all of you for coming out and engaging in this work. I'll turn it back to Cheryl.
Okay, well, thank you, Dana Lynn, for that heartfelt land acknowledgement. I feel like I always learn something new whenever I listen to you. As a white immigrant settler myself on these lands, I recognize the significant privilege that I have to live, work, and play on the unceded lands of the Coast Salish people. I'm also committed to actively working against colonialism towards reconciliation, which I think really connects us to the work that we're all coming together here for today. One of the goals of Black History Month is to recognize and celebrate the many achievements and contributions of Black Canadians who throughout history have done so much to make Canada a culturally diverse, compassionate, and prosperous country. And I know that many of you joined us for our first event for Black History Month, where we heard from Bashir Mohammed, who talked about Black Canadian history, particularly the history in Western Canada and at UBC. For many of us, that history was not well known, as it has been largely ignored as part of Canada's history, particularly as it relates to the history of our disciplines and our professions in applied science. So if you haven't seen that talk, I strongly encourage you to watch the video. I'll put a link to that video in the chat as well. It was an amazing talk, and I learned so much by listening to Bashir and to the great conversation that we had after the talk. One of the things that really came out of that is how we all must learn from the past to better understand the present, and we must work together to create a better future that is just for everyone. And core to that is education. Education is key. It's essential to creating change. It's essential to what we do here. So we all have a role to play in our classrooms, our labs, our workplaces to ensure that we create an anti-racist, equitable, and inclusive community where everyone can thrive. And so today we're very excited for the last event of Black History Month here in February, though the work continues, to have an amazing panel. So before we introduce the panel, I just want to acknowledge a few folks that really helped us with putting together this event and all of the Black History Month programming. I want to start by thanking Bashir. He has been a tireless leader for all the events and activities that have been planned for Black History Month, including the pop-up museum that I'm sure many of you saw in Kaiser, as well as the virtual pop-up museum, if you haven't checked that out. I also want to acknowledge all the help from Sarah, Britt, and Janice, the sort of admin team on logistics. They've done an amazing job in helping us to coordinate all these different things, and to Wendy's team for their help with communications. So with all that, I'm going to now hand it over to Dana Lynn, who's going to introduce Bashir.
Thanks, Cheryl. We are very fortunate to have Bashir Mohammed leading this panel discussion today in this final event of Black History Month. Bashir is an EDI coordinator in applied science. He's been the lead organizer, as Cheryl said, for all the events we've planned this month. Bashir has been here for 3 months. It's hard to believe with the impact he's already had. He joined us in November after serving for 3 years in the Royal Canadian Navy as a naval warfare officer. And in this role, he served as the manager for the Leadership, Respect, and Honor program to eliminate sexual misconduct and increase cultural diversity in the Royal Canadian Navy. Prior to that, he worked as a policy and research analyst for the government of Alberta. He was also the co-founder of Black Lives Matter in Edmonton, and their work to eliminate carding in Alberta led them to receive the Civil Liberties Association Award for excellence in community activism. And as you will see today, Bashir is a history enthusiast. He's written articles about Black Canadian history. We're really fortunate to have him here today, and I'm going to turn it to him to introduce our other panelists.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. So we have two amazing panelists, Ashley Kairu and Natalie Chambers. I will begin by introducing Ashley. Ashley Kairu is in her final year of chemical engineering with a passion for clean energy and sustainability. Originally from Kenya, she's lived in Uganda and South Africa prior to moving to Vancouver. Since moving here, she's been working hard to create strong community ties for Black African students at UBC. She was president of the UBC Africa Awareness Initiative that strives to improve discourse surrounding and including Africa while creating a community for Africans at UBC. She is currently working with the Faculty of Applied Science as an equity ambassador and is the founder and president of the UBC chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. We're honored to have Ashley here. Also joining us is Natalie Chambers. Natalie Chambers has been a registered nurse for over 15 years, alumni from the UBC MSN program in 2019, and now serves as a manager for the School of Nursing Clinical Practice Placement Unit, or CPPU. Natalie and her team interacts with clinical sites across the Lower Mainland to ensure both undergraduate and graduate nursing students have access to relevant clinical practice experiences during their degree programs. Her team ensures that each nursing student receives the quality clinical practice experience required to complete their education. In her role as CPPU manager, she also serves as co-chair of the school's anti-racism committee. Natalie co-led the development of the ARC's comprehensive work plan to foster an equity-oriented, culturally safe, and decolonizing environment. This work includes embedding an anti-racist orientation in policies and practices and building the leadership capacity of students, faculty, and staff to be agents of structural change within the university, the nursing profession, and the healthcare system. Natalie is a leader in building respectful and inclusive environments that reflect the diversity of students and nurses within the academic setting. She has also been instrumental in including students in anti-racism work and supporting the development of the Nursing Student Anti-Racism Caucus. Natalie was also selected as one of the 2022 recipients of the University President Staff Awards for Anti-Racism and Exclusive Excellence. Yeah, I just want to say it's a huge, huge honor to have both of you here. So we have a few categories that we're going to talk about, a few themes, And then at the end, we're going to open it to questions for everybody. Once we get to that point, you're free to type questions in the chat, but we'll begin with some structured questions. So our first topic is about Blackness. And yeah, you know, it may sound as an abstract topic, but when you think about it, it is a little bit strange that, you know, Blackness serves as such a unifying identity because, you know, myself, my background is Somali, even though I was born in Kenya. Ashley Kairu has a different background than me. Natalie Chambers has a totally different background from me. And we grew up speaking different languages. And I think that's important to acknowledge because, yeah, like people can be Black and be from, you know, many different parts of the world. And as, you know, someone who's really interested in history and as somebody who, as, you know, somebody who did the Black History Month talk on February 1st, you probably recall that this identity of Blackness was created and formed within a structure of a racist and systematically oppressive society that sought to categorize people with Black skin in one social category. So when you saw resistance to immigration, Black immigration to Canada, it was often done on those racial lines. And this Black community, Black culture, Black excellence that has kind of flourished since then was done in response to that racial categorization. Because we were put into these categories and put into this box, we resisted. And I think that's just kind of important to just say right off the bat and kind of clearly define what we're talking about. Yeah, and just a few other notes too. When me and Ashley and Natalie were meeting, we also talked about the term BIPOC and how, you know, while it can be a useful term when talking about Black issues, it's really important to be specific because the issues that impact the Black community are in many ways unique, and we'll be talking about some of those issues as we speak. But before we move on to the next theme, I wanted to pass it to Ashley to see if you had anything you wanted to add about this concept and theme.
Yeah, thank you, Bashir. And thank you for, you know, we spoke about wanting to focus this talk on the Black experience and as Black folk in different roles in the university, it's wonderful to be on this panel to speak about, you know, the experiences we've had, you know, in ways they overlapped and in ways they're different, you know, whether that's a student or staff perspective. So I'd just really like to say thank you, Bashir, for having us here, but thank you for centering this discussion on Blackness and that experience on its own.
Natalie, would you like to comment?
Yeah. Yeah, Blackness in and of itself is a challenging and can be challenging and fraught expression, but I think people of color, especially brown and Black skin, we've somewhat accepted it as the way we are categorized, but we're trying to change the narrative from maybe somewhat of a negative perception to as positive as we can make it, and trying to express Blackness in terms of culture or Black excellence or other ways. It's really a way to talk about being Black in Canada or existing in a Black skin, but really trying to separate that negative connotation that comes with being Black and trying to really push the narrative forward in a positive way. So I know this panel has a student representative, has a staff representative, and I'm not sure, Bashir, if you wanted to mention about the faculty representation that we were hoping for and how that played out. But I think it would be important to acknowledge that here before we move forward, because we were hoping to have all perspectives here today.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. So our original plan for this was actually, so we were going to be in person, and the idea was that we would actually have an empty chair representing the faculty, the Black faculty perspective, which is often missing, but also just to mention the absence that exists within the staff and student realm as well, but mostly the faculty side. So for example, within engineering at UBC on the Vancouver campus, I was unable to find a Black professor, and like to find a Black professor to invite. And within a few of the other schools within the Faculty of Applied Science, it was also the same thing. Sala and Scarp, it was, yeah, like we could not find a Black faculty member. So the idea of that chair was just to highlight the absence. And I've told this to Natalie a few times, but since coming here, I've kind of kept a mental count in my head of how often I've been physically in the same space, work-wise, as another Black person. And that number is 4. And Natalie and Ashley have been all of those times. And I think that's interesting when speaking about absence. And I think it's important, you know, as members who are joining and viewing this panel, to maybe just reflect on if that's something you've even had to think about and how that can possibly impact your sense of place. And Ashley, I don't know if you feel comfortable maybe talking about your experience of trying to find a Black faculty mentor for some of the programming you're doing. If you're not comfortable, we can also talk about that later as well.
For sure, I'll go on now. I also just wanted to touch on what you mentioned, Bashir, about, you know, counting the number of times you've been in physically in spaces with Black folk. And, you know, I remember you mentioning that to me once, and it had become such a norm to not be in spaces with other Black people that, you know, I didn't even think about it. And, you know, it really got me thinking, if I were to start counting, you know, over a month, how many would that be? Over 2 months, over the term, over the year, over my time at UBC, what would that look like? But unfortunately, it's become such a norm to not be in spaces with the other Black folk. And yeah, and that leads into the absence of Black folk in applied science. And you mentioned the lack of Black faculty. So I recently founded the National Society of Black Engineers UBC chapter. And this is a student club that is meant to support, empower, and create a community for Black engineering students at UBC. And just like you, Bashir, trying to find a speaker for this panel, a faculty speaker, I also went on a long look that I was hoping would end, you know, positively for a Black engineering faculty advisor. And, you know, I reached out to everyone I thought that could lead me there, but it came up blank. And, you know, throughout my time at that point, I'd never had a Black faculty in classes and labs through any of my courses, but I hoped, maybe a little bit naively, that they would be a Black faculty member in engineering. But unfortunately there wasn't. And it's really hard to try to create Black spaces for students when there is no role models that look like us that we can look up to in academia. And, you know, this club was meant to empower and foster Black students, but when there is a lack of representation at the faculty level of just faculty that look like us and that we can see ourselves in, it's really hard and it's tough. And, you know, I'd like to thank the allies that we have. You know, Dr. Staub French stepped up and is our current faculty advisor. And I'm so grateful for that. And, you know, she was able to kind of step into that role. And I would hope intermittently, because the hope is that they would be a Black engineering faculty advisor at some point. But even though we have these allies, it doesn't mitigate that need for a faculty advisor, and to see faculty, not just, you know, within a club, but in the classroom, to have someone to look up to as Black students. And so that sense of absence is really tough to deal with, because it affects the different spheres, you know, as students, as faculty, and you two can talk about it, you know, as from a staff perspective. But it's tough, and it's tough for a student not seeing faculty, but there's also not a ton of Black students in general. And so, you know, in my cohort, there's 30 of us in the bio stream in chemical engineering, and I'm the only one of about 30. And so that feeling of absence is consistent and hard, and a tough a tough problem, but I would like to think there is hope. And I'm so glad that the three of us are able to sit on this panel today and speak of this experience.
And yeah, I think that's an excellent segue. I also think it's important to like also talk about why there is that absence, because since moving here, kind of the initial reaction I get from most people is the reason there's absence is because there's no Black people in Vancouver. But it's interesting to like kind of unpack that a little bit and question why there is so few Black people in British Columbia. Like we only make up 1% of the population here. And if you attended the history talk or if you're going to watch it later, you can see that a key reason for that was actually the immigration policies in the early 1900s, where Black people were intentionally turned away at the border, but also within segregation policies that existed within professions in our disciplines across Canada. To give one example, I attended a nursing talk last week where they talked about the history of nursing, and specifically at UBC. And they found that from 1970 to 2014, there was only 15 Black nursing graduates, and 4 of them were in 2014. So when you look at that and you look at the history of that, well, we know segregation in nursing across Canada lasted between the 1940s and 50s. But even though those barriers were removed, there was likely still implicit barriers that led to it only being until the 1970s for there to be that inclusion within the profession. So when we're talking about absence here, I think an easy explanation is, well, the reason there's absence is because there's no Black people. But a more complicated and more intentional answer is there's few Black people here because of these immigration policies, the legacies of those policies, but at the same time, these attitudes within our professions that were explicit, but are now more implicit. So yeah, I really appreciate that talk. And I recommend most people go on the nursing faculty website and see if they can view a recording of that. But we've transitioned to the theme of absence. So great segue. So I thought I'd pass it on to Natalie just to share the staff perspective when it comes to this theme of absence and the impact it has on you.
Yeah. Thank you, Bashir. Thank you, Ashley. Great talk so far. The staff perspective, I am fairly new to UBC in this role, and it just so happens that this is my alma mater. I did do my grad studies at UBC School of Nursing. In my class was probably 1 or 2 to 3 Black students, and one of them happened to be Ethiopian as well. But I would say being staff is a little bit more complex, and sometimes it's hard to understand because it's so complex, right? You have different categories of staff. You have staff being in a certain role where they may not have feel empowered to probably speak out or get involved. So, for example, we have the anti-racism committee within the School of Nursing, and truly it's a very new committee, but we have programs in place for staff to get involved, faculty to get involved, students to get involved, and we have noted staff are a little bit less engaged. And it's a really complex issue because then you ask, are we going to ask staff then to volunteer and work above and beyond what their typical workload is? And maybe that might be some of the resistance, or would some of the resistance be based on not really being comfortable or not feeling safe in maybe speaking up about some of the experiences or some of the things that they want to see? So trying to address complexities like that, it's something that's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more thoughtful action. So I could say for myself, once I stepped into the School of Nursing, I recognize I am probably one of the only Black managers, probably the first in that executive leadership of the school. And I really appreciate the opportunity. But when I reflected on it, I recognized that once I was a student and I got involved and people were familiar with what I've done as a student, then I was able to be recommended then to say, okay, Natalie, you might fit with this job. Are you interested in this? And I thought, hey, maybe if I wasn't involved or wasn't participating or didn't have someone who recommended, then maybe I wouldn't have heard of this position, right? And so this is a part of why I think it's important for Black students and even faculty to have these opportunities where they have allies or they have people who are thinking about, okay, how can I help you to move forward, or how can I get you involved more in the fabric of the school or in the department or faculty of the larger faculty. So I'm just thinking about it from the aspect of what is the purpose or importance of having Black faculty. I mean, a student perspective, how could it help a student to get involved with research or to find out about research opportunities? How could it help even a faculty member who's new progress in their tenure track or whatever their career trajectory is? We find that if you're the only one or one of a few or not having those allies or not having those connections, it could really impact your career trajectory one way or the other. And even when you talk, Bashir, about how some of these structures have from so long ago have in fact impacted society to this day, how can we disrupt that? How can we change that then for the future? And it does start with education, but it also starts with seeing it important to bring more Black people into the fabric of the university so we can get a more diverse and advancement then of Black people in this province and in this country.
That's an excellent segue. Our next theme is specifically talking about people's career paths. And I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Alberta, and it was interesting. I don't recall having a Black professor, even in my secondary school, elementary, junior high, high school. Same thing when it comes to teacher. I don't think I had a single Black teacher within that experience. But when I got to the university was, I lived in the north end of the city in social housing, and the university was about like 30-minute commute one way. And I remember getting there often early in the morning, but the people I would see who, looked like me, who I could identify with, who I could speak to in my own language, were the janitors, were the people cleaning the building. And I thought that was, like, later on, I realized that's kind of a very stark experience, because like I never saw myself, like I never considered academia as a path, which is interesting. Like it was never in my mind that I would immediately do a master's and then immediately do a PhD and then maybe become a professor. And it's not because I wasn't interested in that, it's because I thought it was impossible, because I just didn't see people like me. And I'm sure that experience also extends to a Black person growing up in Vancouver and attending UBC. But I just wanted to mention that and how it ties into this next theme. So when it comes to career path, yes, we previously discussed about how a lot of it is influenced by who you know and also the connections. I find academia is interesting in the sense that when you get to the academic side, it is more so kind of who you know, and it is kind of reputation based. And one has to wonder the impact it has, and also what's being reproduced, which groups are entering those dominant positions, who is getting those research assistant positions. And if you're not intentional, then that cycle continues. So I wanted to pass this on to Ashley just to talk a little bit about career paths and how the Black experience ties into that.
Yeah, and for sure, as you mentioned, even your time at University of Alberta, you weren't seeing any Black professors. I know you're a fairly young man, so it can't have been that long ago, but even now, I'm having that same experience at a different university across the country. But yeah, it's a cycle that seems to perpetuate, in different parts of the country. But yeah, just in terms of career trajectory, I'm learning a little bit more now, the impact of kind of your connections, who gets you, places as I'm about to graduate. That's coming a little bit more apparent. And I also often don't think of myself in academia, but would I have thought of that if I saw faculty that look like me in academia, that I could talk to about experience in academia, what it's like to go through your master's, your PhD, into to tenure track, whatever that might be. And I think that's not my interest, but I don't know what that would have been like if I had seen someone that looked like me. And we also say that the people that do research affect the research that is done, right? And if there's no Black folk doing, or a small number of Black folk doing research, then it affects the type of research that's done. And that obviously has an effect on UBC itself, because UBC is a wonderful research university, but there could be a lack of research being done due to the people that are doing the research. And so, further than just the interpersonal issues, there's also that further issue of what research is being missed out on, or what lenses is the research not being looked through. And so, yeah, and I'll pass it on to Natalie, because I'm just about to graduate, so my career trajectory is not what it will be in a few years' time, and so I'll pass it on to you, Natalie, that has a little bit more perspective in that aspect.
Yeah. Not sure I heard this quote, but I remember someone saying, even for faculty, I can't speak for faculty, but because it's a part of the conversation, it's not only career trajectory is not only for students and for going into the workforce, but even in academia, faculty do try to go from tenure to tenure, up the ladder that way as well. And I remember hearing someone say the climb up to tenure can be lonely. And it's a similar experience when you're a staff member or you're in leadership. That experience can be lonely if you don't see people who are like you or are able to share share some of those experiences. But I can say that, I think for the past 2 or 3 years since we've started our anti-racism committee, for example, some of those conversations have begun. Like we did some deep dive discussions with faculty, staff with staff, students with students. And some of those things came out, about what's important, having things like safe spaces to talk or to express. We had our students start even a book club to talk about some of these issues. And we have had even talking about, okay, can we make a statement? Can we look at curriculum? Can we look at what we can do to make our environment a little bit more conducive to even just having these conversations? And I think that those types of things make that step towards where we need to get to, but we certainly have a lot of room to grow. But definitely who makes a difference. And I really appreciate you talking about that cycle of research, because it is true. If you don't have Black people in certain spaces, then you don't get certain things done. And then it continues into the next generation, where people just continue to think you don't have Black people who can be heads of universities. And I can tell you that it does make a difference. And even in your career as an engineer or as a nurse, I saw that Canada now has a chief nursing officer of Canada. And I'm like, that inspired me to say a nurse can be in government, someday. And it's the same thing for a young Black child can see a Black professor or a Black engineer and think, I could do that. And so it does make a difference. And I think what we want to do is try to look at that cycle of absence and how can we break that? How can we disrupt that? Whether it be getting involved. And I think it's really important to encourage our people of color, Black people, to get involved. Don't just exist, try to get involved in the work that needs to be done, whether it be volunteering or whether it be participating in school government, participating in work beyond your 9 to 5. Really, really getting involved makes a difference, because that's where it starts. It has to start somewhere to make that change, as we talked about, to kind of break that cycle. And I think that's what I think we're trying to do in terms of getting involved in anti-racism work outside of my typical job function. So that's kind of my thought, and I'm trying to stay motivated to keep moving my career along, and making those connections, which I think is really important. So thank you for this opportunity even to participate in this talk today.
Oh no, you've all been amazing, and we're moving towards our last theme. But before I introduce that theme, afterwards we're going to have a Q&A. If you have a question as we're talking, feel free to type your questions in the chat so that once we get to the Q&A, we can immediately jump in. So before I talk about breaking the cycle of absence, kind of ending this on a note that inspires action. I think it's important to talk about the weight behind why these conversations are so important. If you visited the virtual museum or the pop-up museum, you'll probably see the display on Hogan's Alley. The destruction of Hogan's Alley took multiple decades and involved people within our disciplines, within community planning, within architecture, within civil engineering. And I think it's just really important to acknowledge that. And, going forward, civil engineers, architects, community planners will be working on projects that impact Black people, not just in Vancouver and BC, but across Canada. And I think it's really important to have these perspectives, because otherwise, who knows? Maybe if you took those people who were involved in those projects and set them to the future and had them attend sessions like this, maybe they would have approached it with a different perspective. When we look at the medical field and the nursing field, I remember when I was doing my advanced first aid within the military, I thought it was interesting how a lot of the diagrams that were used were of patients who were white. If you look at diagrams showing pregnant women, more often than not, it's white diagrams. And it was only a couple of years ago that I saw those diagrams shown with Black skin. And it was interesting just seeing how different that context is. Even simple things like burns, cuts, and scrapes, those have practical impacts. And I think if you don't think about that, if you allow that absence to exist, you allow the negative impact of negative health incomes or negative health outcomes to actually happen. You allow engineering projects, community planning projects to negatively impact Black communities. So I think that sense of urgency is important on why we need to think about breaking the cycle. So our final theme, the cycle of absence and how to break it. We have very few Black faculty, very few Black students, very few Black spaces. So how can we interrupt this cycle? And Ashley, this is a big question. I'm going to pass it to you first.
Yeah, it is a really big question, and there is for sure not one answer. And, we speak about kind of the pipeline from, at least in the UBC's perspective, from as students, maybe into grad, into faculty, or maybe as students into staff. And that pipeline is quite cyclical, right? As students, if we don't see faculty that look like us, we're less inclined to go into faculty, right? And then vice versa, then there's fewer Black faculty, the pipeline continues, right? And so I feel like there's different points at which you can kind of tap into that pipeline to kind of break that cycle, or to improve it in a way that instead of being kind of negative affecting it, it positively affects it. And, within the three of us, like Bashir, your addition into the EDII office has led to the February 1st talk, which was so educative for a lot of people, myself included. There was a lot of facts there that, exist somewhere on the internet or in the libraries, but your ability to kind of bring it all together and make it specific to our professions was really important. And so having staff members like you in applied science is really, really important because of the lens you bring, the knowledge you bring, and the effect that has, right? I would like to think everyone that attended and or watched it after is continuing with that extra knowledge of the history that has kind of brought us to this moment where we're facing this cyclic pipeline of a lack of Black staff, Black student, and Black faculty. But there's other things as well. We want to create a sense of community for the different groups and the groups together. And so that Black people are seeing each other, you know, and you mentioned how, you know, the times you've been in rooms with Black people have been, you know, with me and Natalie. But that in itself is a sense of community in which, you know, we shared our experiences with each other. And a lot of things we could relate on, even though we're sitting, you know, Bashir, you're slightly newer to the staff realm. Natalie, you've lived both student and staff perspective. But I also think, and Natalie, you touched on this earlier, that there are lots of folk that are doing work to help this issue, to kind of face anti-Black racism. And it's important that there's recognition for that work, because a lot of times it goes unrecognized. And it's people putting extra hours outside of their work hours, outside of their school hours, whatever, but outside of their position, right? And a lot of time that work isn't recognized, but the importance of it is unmatched and therefore needs to be recognized. And I'm not, it's not always monetary recognition. Maybe there's other ways of recognition, certification, whatever it might be. But I think it's really important that people that are doing the work are recognized for that work. And so it can be championed as important work to do, right? It's championed to a similar degree as great research, because the impact of it is important and is effective. And so, yeah, I kind of listed a few things there. And as I said, Bashir, this question doesn't have one answer. But I think there's different kind of gates that you can open up to kind of help fix that cycle. And so those are a few of my thoughts. Natalie, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to segue right off of your point, because it's really, really important to do the work, but then the work takes resources, and oftentimes that resource needs to be financial. And obviously, what you care about, you invest in. And it is true that often the work of addressing Black issues kind of falls on Black people. And I certainly can just give a disclaimer here. I don't feel this work is a burden for me at all. But if there are issues and work that needs to be done, we will not only have Black people doing it, we'll have a lot of people doing it, but overall we will need support and resourcing. So I was very proud to be a part of UBC few years ago when the Black Lives Matter movement came out and the president made a statement on anti-racism, and so many we all joined together. School of Nursing has a statement on anti-racism, but all the work that we're doing, it is, on top of or volunteer. And to move a lot of the things along, we need an investment. And so we've tried to do as much as we can in terms of saying, okay, what can we do? What can we ask this person to help us with, or this team to help us with? But ultimately, what we will need is investment of time and resources. We need education. We need some of these courses. We already started in talks with Cheryl about some of that. So you know what I'm talking about already. But beyond that, what we've recognized is students are calling for more action on our part. They are wanting us to have an accountability process in place. They're calling for support, someone to help to field complaints and concerns and redirect people. So as much as if this is important, we will invest in it because there is a lot of work to be done, and it is impactful. I can say that, for example, the Anti-Racism Committee, we've been approached to participate in the project D-Hope. It's the Diversifying Health Professions. So that's a project that UBC Health Disciplines collaborate on, but we invested money into that to make a week where we can reach out to equity denied groups in high schools and elementary schools to come on up and learn a little bit about UBC Health Sciences. So there's another program that we've invested in, but there's so much more that we can do. So I'm only saying all of that to say people need to help, but we also need help to get the work moving forward. And so that's just my little spiel as far as, what we can do, because we have great ideas, but how do we get them actually accomplished? We need resources.
For sure. I think that's an excellent point. Yesterday I was in Calgary, was giving a history talk there, and this principal reached out to me, an elementary school principal, and she asked if I could give her school a history talk. Now, she described the school as being not very diverse, and in Alberta, this history is not in the curriculum. And actually in BC, there is a Black Studies course, but that course is optional, and that course actually doesn't count towards the social studies credit. So there's also issues in BC with the curriculum. But it was interesting, I'm standing there, I'm speaking in front of a few hundred elementary students, people between 5 to 12 years old, and most were bored out of their minds. But it was interesting, out of that, maybe 10% were super engaged. And out of that 10%, there's 3 or 4 Black students, and they were all sitting kind of around me. And I thought that was interesting how they intentionally moved like closer towards me. And they were just laser focused. And one of them at the end came up to me and said, "How can I do what you do?" And that was kind of surreal, because me right now, I'm 28. So I don't know, I like to consider myself young, but I'm rapidly approaching 30. But it was kind of surreal because, I'm not that far off from my undergrad. And it was just kind of surreal to realize, okay, these kids are going to be looking up to me as, potential role models. And I'm sure, Natalie, like, you've experienced that. Ashley, I'm not sure if you've experienced that yet, but it is a surreal experience. And I just noticed our final point here was, potentially talking about how despite these barriers, we were able to get where we are because of blank. And for me, I think it was because, even though there was an absence, there were still a few Black people that I would encounter doing really cool things. And that's what inspired me to go forward. My dad in Somalia was a civil engineer. My mom in Somalia was a nurse. When they came to Canada, their degrees were not recognized, but their stories of what they did back in Somalia inspired me. So yeah, I'm just curious, before we open up, if you can maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's true. We do need inspiration. My mother is an educator. She moved up the ranks in the Ministry of Education in Jamaica. So I always felt that pressure to, not necessarily pressure, but inspiration, because she was also very active in her community. She was just, she's done so much, and she's been recognized, and she's just done a lot of great work for people, just a real servant. And I've always been that way too, serving and participating, but we always look to role models, and not necessarily only Black role models. And we always appreciate, I think, allies and people who see something in you beyond the color of your skin, and that you feel like you are valued for who you are or what you bring to the table, or someone who is encouraging you to say, you can do this and I support you. And oftentimes, I've found that in work, in school, and that's really important. So I think it's important for us to begin to see people beyond what their physical representation is, and see potential in people. And even the events that you have, like the engineering open house that you had the other day, I brought my little daughter there. I said, come and see, because we do need to do a little bit extra effort to motivate people who are not, it doesn't come easily, or it's not automatically a door open for them, that we have to say, this is possible, and I'm going to push you, and I'm going to help you to get there.
Yeah, really well said, Natalie. And just going off of that, and I think, I would like to think kind of creating systems that going forward can keep going, and even as easy as a system of Bashir videoing his talk on February 1st, right? That's something that can be watched in the future, right? And so even the work that we're doing, can help kind of remove barriers moving forward, so that if people are looking for, where is the information on Black Canadian history related to engineering, nursing, and urban planning, that exists. And, I really like how you said that there are lots of people that champion us, right? And that have our back and support us. And whether that is Black folk or allies, there is there is the hope and the opportunity to establish ourselves where we want to be. And Bashir and Ali, I look up to you too. I'm not in any way a lot younger than you, but you're people that I look up to. Nali, the work that you do seems incredible, and I'm almost sad that it took us this long to meet. And Bashir, you're a new addition to the EDII office, but I'm so grateful for kind of what you brought. Dan Lynn said you've only been here 3 months, and I was like, 3 months? It feels like it's been so much because of the work you've done. And so, Bashir, as you were saying, you're role models to the elementary kids, but you're role models in your communities, right? Whether you recognize it or not. And so I'm so grateful for leaders like you two that kind of set the stage for me and generations to come because of the important work you're doing. And so, despite these barriers, I'm still able to see leaders like you and look up to you two and others. But yeah.
Wow, I'm very humbled. And I really do appreciate this point because like there's a lot of work that non-Black people can do to break the cycle. That principal who invited me to her school was a white principal, but because of that, her students were exposed to somebody who they probably wouldn't get. She told me that no teachers in her school are Black, which is interesting. Even within UBC, within our faculty, we thankfully have a EDI in the classroom fund. And sorry, I don't mean to promote the EDI office, but we have this fund. So if someone within the faculty wants to bring in a Black architect, they want to bring in a Black community planner just to talk about their experience, just to show that these things are possible, those funds exist and are accessible for people. So yeah, I think, you two are amazing role models. You inspire a lot of people, but this work can also be done and has been done by non-Black people. And thankfully these supports do exist. And I want to echo, without those resources, it would make this work much more difficult. But wow, you two inspire me. And honestly, been here for 3 months, but I've been so happy to meet you two. You two are wonderful. So that was the end of our prepared segment. Sarah, were there any questions in the chat? If not, I have one more question I can kind of ask everybody while we wait.
Yeah, not a question yet. So I think you can go ahead and proceed. And I've also allowed the guests to share their video or unmute themselves. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to join the conversation.
Cool. So while we wait for that, actually, I do have one question I'm curious about. So I mentioned that story of that student coming up to me. Have you had that yet in your, well, even you probably have, but I'm just curious. Have you had those moments where you've kind of realized, wow, okay, I was looking up for this mentorship, but now there's all these students and younger people looking up to me as well? Are you having tech difficulties? There, oh, you're good.
No, I think Sarah might have muted all of us. My bad, I couldn't unmute myself. Yeah, but sorry, Bashir, if you'd just be able to repeat your question, please.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I was just asking, I mentioned that story of realizing, oh wow, some people will look up to me and I may not notice it. And that moment kind of made me straighten my back a bit more and, be more conscious of that. I'm just curious about those moments that you had, and if you can speak to those moments where you've realized, okay, I'm that mentor now, whether I like it or not.
Yeah, for sure. I'll mention 2 specific ones. So having established the National Society of Black Engineers, I've kind of stepped into a role of founder and presidency, but a lot of people, especially the younger years, are kind of looking up to me and my executive team as leaders in the student community for Black folk. And so it's been an interesting kind of dynamic shift where, I was was creating this club for community and for that support. But in that aspect, having to step into that leadership role and be a mentor, and and I think there's two different types of mentorship. There's kind of the more strict formal mentorship, and then there's a more informal mentorship that we see. And so that's one example. And second is, I'd like to say almost a year ago today, I could be quoting that incorrectly and Cheryl could correct me. We hosted Antonia from the Ethos Lab. And the Ethos Lab is catered towards younger students. And she invited me to an event where I was speaking to students. The average age was about 13 or 12. And being in that space where I was speaking about my experience as someone seemingly older than them, even though, myself, I think myself quite young, and kind of sharing my experience, but also the advice I had to give to them, and I was giving advice as an engineering student, but also as a Black woman in engineering, which is, there's not many of us. And so kind of stepping into those spaces where, I'm looked up to, and a role model is a crazy shift, because as I grow up, I realize that I'm becoming that, and the importance of being authentically myself when I step into those places, and being honest with kind of the advice and the truth, the hardships and the goods, that kind of I can attest to and that I've experienced. And so yeah, slowly and steadily, Bashir, I keep finding myself in spaces where people looking up to me, where I feel like before it's been, consistently the other way around.
I appreciate that. So the other day I did an event with Patricia Irvine, who's the niece of the founder or one of the co-founders of the British Columbia Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And she showed me a photo of a float they did. And underneath the photo was their slogan, which is "Equality is taught by our children." Natalie, you mentioned your child and bringing your child to that engineering event. But yeah, I'm just curious about, I guess both of your perspectives. We're talking about the cycle, and I'm really curious what the experiences are of those Black children who are growing up now that, there are people like us within these positions and more consciousness around openly talking about these issues. So yeah, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that, because this is something I think about a lot.
Yeah, it's always in the back of my mind, my children are my inspiration and my interest in anti-racism work. For me, my children are oftentimes maybe one only Black child in their school, or one of a few. And it's interesting because, as you said earlier, children, they're the model of equality, because they have no idea about the color of their skin until somebody tells them. So I remember my daughter came home, my 5-year-old, she said, so-and-so said, I'm Black. I said, who told you that you're Black? I purposely asked her that, because we don't talk about being Black at home per se, but I just found it so interesting because it's such a multicultural environment for the children. They have all different cultures, white, Chinese, and they just play and they love each other and they hug and they kiss and they're just so innocent. And so for me, I think that we just try to talk to them as treating each other as children and respecting, and even I really appreciate that in the curriculum when they evaluate the students, they talk about how they are as a community in the class, how they treat each other. They look at that when they evaluate, how they're doing in their coursework, how they interact with each other. It's so great to see. But for me, I feel a weight of trying to do the best I can to make the world a better place for them. And I see the younger generation as being so much more aware than we were probably when we were growing up. Being an immigrant, or maybe not experiencing racism in the same way our parents and grandparents did, but little ways, and just kind of disrupting that. It's really, really important, I think, to do the best we can to make the world better for our children and to keep them as aware. I'm more focused on getting them educated, getting them cultured. I try to bring them to museums. I try to tell them about history. I'm into, just try to give them a wide range of a worldview where it doesn't become this narrow focus, and they can really accept the world with an open arm versus really having a tainted view. And that's my focus, and that's how I try to raise my children.
Ashley, do you want to add anything?
Much less than Natalie, because I'm not in spaces where I'm around children often. Honestly, if ever. And so, but I'd like to think, as us as adults become more aware and educated on anti-racism and then kind of acting that out in our lives, like being actively anti-racist, and that passes on to generations to come. And so, there's a hope that with time progression, the children become active anti-racists. And Natalie, you said, your kids didn't know they were Black, which is, I guess, yeah, until someone tells them, I guess you don't know that. But I think even shifting that from, being aware of that, but understanding, the historical effects of that, but moving forward, how to be anti-racist in your everyday. And, kids will learn that as they grow up, but, as adults, and that's, as parents, as distant family members, as friends of children, kind of pushing that onto them, and because they learn from the people around them, right? And so ensuring that we are good leaders, especially in our anti-racism, I would hope that could continue passing down generations and perpetuate, more generations being increasingly anti-racist.
Really appreciate those words. So I'll open it up to any questions. If anyone wants to raise their hand, we'll spend a few minutes on that, and then we can pass it to James to give closing remarks. And Cheryl, I don't know if you wanted to add a few words at the very end, but we can also do that as well. But yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions, or type in chat. See one hand raised. Oh, Andrew, feel free to go ahead.
Thanks. I don't know if I'm the only one that's experiencing the chat being disabled, so I'm happy to hear the sound of my own voice. Just wanted to thank the three of you. I think in particular just for probably addressing things that I think about from time to time in my UBC experience. I think I'm 2 years with UBC, and I've only had the pleasure of meeting Natalie as another Black person, and my perspective is maybe a little different, being multiracial, but both my parents immigrated to Canada. And so my question was, well, first of all, I just wanted to say thank you all. I've appreciated each of your perspectives, but maybe just thinking about how we synergize the efforts across campus. I've heard each of you reference facets of my work, and part of it is time. Like, I think I've wanted to reach out to Ashley over the last while. Bashir, I haven't had the chance to meet you yet, so I've made notes of things to follow up on. And so I think a little bit of it is my own efforts and putting those efforts out there, but knowing that my work is really centered on improving diversity and barrier facing youth. Yeah, maybe how do you think we could synergize efforts across so many different teams within the campus to be able to maybe to deepen our impact? And I think really focusing on welcoming space. Like, how do you think we carve it out? I know it's such a big concept, and there's a lot of investment and commitment, but maybe where you see those pieces going.
I have my thoughts. Ashley and Natalie, would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
I'd love you to share your thoughts, because I have thoughts too, but I think that's an excellent question. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
For sure. So just right off the bat, the first or second day at UBC was actually the anti-oppression panel that was held in November that you were on, Andrew. And that was a really cool experience because that was like the first time I was in the same room as another Black person. It was like one of my first days. And it was cool, like just hearing about the work you do, because as I mentioned before, like a lot of these pieces are already there. So for example, we have the EDI Eye in the Classroom funding. We have the work that Gearing Up is doing. I think what needs to happen is we just got to be a bit more intentional with the type of advocacy, with the type of outreach we're doing and engagement we're doing. And I know this sounds cheesy and this may be a cop-out answer, but I think the first step of like coordinating and like being more intentional is this panel, like the four of us. Like, I mean, I haven't met you one-on-one yet, but I feel like I'm meeting you. And I like in the middle of the talk, I noticed that your name was there and I sent you a little note. But I think this is the first step, just forming these connections. I think practical next steps are, finding, I know you're very busy, but maybe finding time with myself and Cheryl. I don't want to volunteer them because I'm still learning about our strategic plan and everything. But I think, just forming those connections, getting closer to what Gearing Up is doing, aligning it with some of the programming and funding that we have within the Dean's office, I think those are all very good steps. And I think this right here is the foundation. Natalie and Ashley.
I'll add to that. Definitely, we need to partner and align. I think within UBC, everything we do is under a strategic plan. So UBC has their strategic plan, and then each faculty or school will have their own strategic plan, but really aligning. And we've tried, or we've already begun those connections between School of Nursing and talking with Cheryl to try to make sure that what we're doing aligns. But I do notice that Faculty of Medicine or even education, the School of Education has a great anti-racism course. And so it's really going to need to align. And I was hoping that when the task force did that STAIR framework, that it would kind of give us direction about how to structure that. But it would be a question that I would love to find the answer to, where we can align the work that we're doing across campus as it relates to the Black experience and the things that we want to pursue.
Yeah, and then just to finish up, Bashir, I like how you say, this panel is one step of that, right? And I think I'm fortunate to have been doing tidbits of anti-racism work like across campus. And so kind of the connections I made with different people doing work in different places have just been through the work I've done. But yeah, there kind of is a need for a virtual, kind of melting pot for the different initiatives, because there's so much overlap and there's so many ways we could help each other, right? And even through meeting you, Natalie, I was finding out what's going on in school nursing, which is in my faculty, but outside of my department. So I'm a little bit out of the blue on that. And so I think it's important that there is kind of a melting pot of some sort where kind of we can discuss what work's being done and how we can help each other, because I think there's so much growth that could come from that. And to ensure, the research we're doing, for example, is not repetitive, right? If it already exists out, then we can share it with each other to help our particular initiatives or the projects we're working on.
I do want to also add something to my answer. We are doing more of these type of events to like build our toolkits and to like align our work and intentionally being like anti-racist. And on March 21st, it's the International Day for the Elimination of Racism. The EDI office is hosting a talk and also a workshop in the afternoon. I see that Cheryl has posted it in the chat. But if you want to, for anyone who's listening, if you want to be a bit more intentional with like building that toolbox, meeting people from across the faculty, you can register, and I think that'd be really cool. We do have a couple more questions. Andrew, did you have a follow-up or any closing comments?
No, thanks all three of you. And I will make a point, Ashley and Bashir, to reach out to just look at how we can connect specifically.
Awesome.
And Natalie, great to see you.
So we have a question for you, Ashley. I'm curious about the Society for Black Engineers Ashley mentioned. Please, can you share more about this?
For sure. I'll pop a link in the chat as well for that, but it's a recently established student club within applied science. The purpose of it is to create kind of a support community as well as empower Black engineering students. And so we have different events, some based around a little bit more community building, and going forward, we want to focus a little bit more on how we can get Black engineering students connected with Black folk in industry, and kind of start creating those formal and informal mentorships, but also just relationships with Black engineering students as well as industry professionals. But I'll pop a link in the chat, and feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to give any more information, but I think there's some more questions coming through. But I hope that answers it. I'll pop a link in the chat so that you can have more information, as well as the links to our different pages, so you can stay updated as to what's going on and what events will be coming up. But thanks for that question.
Cool. The next question is, how is EDII feeding into the strategic priorities of the faculty and the university as a whole? So it's mentioned within the plan. I'm going to toss a link in it. If you Control F diversity, you'll see one of the strategies is advancing diversity. And the way that's being done, I mean, maybe I can let Cheryl speak a little bit about this, but she posted the link to some of the events we're doing, or not just events, like some of our initiatives. Like we don't just run these events, we do specific initiatives that have this explicit goal of advancing EDII within the faculty. But since I'm only 3 months in, I don't know if Cheryl, you wanted to add a couple of words.
Sure. So, if you look at the university's strategic plan, they explicitly have inclusion as a pillar, and they talk about embedding inclusion in all aspects of academic activities. And that is very much how we've approached the work too, is thinking about how do we embed it, EDI and I, into all aspects of our system structures and conversations. And we're really approaching this through the lens of how do we enable culture change and how do we enable systems change. Within our faculty strategic plan, we have a priority of inclusive leadership and respectful engagement, where you will see more of the strategies specifically about the different components of our focus areas. Within our EDI webpage that I also referenced, you'll see that our approach is really primarily right now focused on education, engagement, like these initiatives, and support for equity, deserving groups in particular. We also have other initiatives around leadership and how do we build this into all aspects of our leadership structures. So that's a quick fly through of the different things that we're doing.
Sure, I appreciate that. So we'll do 2 more questions and then we'll pass it to James. This first question, I'll pass it to Natalie. It is, medical exploitation of Black people have been the basis for much medical research and practice that we use today. How can we begin to dismantle systems so deeply entrenched in racism? So Natalie, if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, I can say that one of the key initiatives that protect all people from exploitation in research is the Tri-Council policy. It's something that is a course that people have to do, and they have to meet those requirements before they do research. On a more practical level, I think it all comes back to education and even health practice. So for instance, in nursing in particular, the British Columbia College of Nursing and Nurses and Midwives, they have included a cultural awareness piece within the framework of the standards of professional practice, so that the school has to consider those things in terms of how we're delivering the courses. The health authorities were practice is happening also has embedded ways of being more culturally aware. And I can tell you there's a lot of research going on about how we can improve probably indigenous specific racism that happens in the clinical setting. And there's so much that is happening in the background that it's not clearly visible. But I think by starting in education, starting by nursing students, med students becoming aware and properly educated about how they can break those things down, it gradually gets there. But it is a real concern. But I can say that there's a lot of legislation around what you can and cannot do. And medical exploitation, especially in Canada and more first world countries, are very, very rare now that there's a lot more knowledge around how these things have been done in the past. That's a start, but definitely there's so much more work we can do to make sure that we counteract it. And I think it starts with education.
Mm-hmm. I do want to, I posted a link about a Black woman, Henry Rita. She was
Henrietta
Lacks,
that lady with the DNA thing, right?
Yeah. Her DNA was taken without consent and was used as the basis for cancer research. So if you want to learn more about a specific example, I think that's something I learned recently, and it really formed my worldview. Our final question. Sorry, let me scroll up. What advice would you give to non-Black folks who are not in high positions of power to support anti-Black racism? Staff and students, for example. Racism is so deeply embedded within our systems. I need to think about this. Ashley and Natalie, do you have any immediate thoughts?
I always say the first step is education. And I think that should, not be falling on reaching out to Black peers to kind of educate you. I think that education needs to come from yourself, and there's so many resources available. And to acknowledge that, Black people are living life as Black people, and it can be quite tough. And so relying on Black people consistently for information can be exhausting. And so taking the time and the effort to educate yourself on Black issues, whether that's historically, currently, because, I think a base of knowledge is important. And to get involved as well. There's great initiatives literally across campus that, support and empower Black people. And there's always a need for help, and whether that's, time, efforts, resources, whatever that might look like. There's opportunities to get involved to kind of further this work as an ally, because this work is important. And yeah, I understand, there's things that can be done, at a higher level that kind of perpetuates systemic change, but there's a lot of things that can be done by everyone, right? And that's education and getting involved, and also questioning your own biases, right? Questioning thoughts that come into your brain, and kind of questioning yourself, and so that you're actively trying to be anti-racist rather than just, non-racist. Yeah, I'll hand it on to you, Natalie.
No, those are great answers. I really wanted to identify that you don't have to be in a position of high power. Most movements begin at grassroots level just by any average person just really getting involved, really examining ourselves and participating and getting to know. And, the more we get involved and get to know each other, the more we realize that we're all pretty much very, very similar in terms of values and ideals and ways of thinking. So it really is important to get involved and to try to get involved in something that you enjoy or you can be passionate about, whether it be arts or whether it be anti-racist efforts or whether it be research or education. There's courses, there's a weaving relations course that's happening. There's an anti-racism course offered by the Faculty of Education. And there's all these events, I think, which even me as a Black person, I'm learning so much by getting involved. So it's really important to get involved.
For sure. Those are great answers. I would again echo, if you can register for our March 21st talk and workshop. I think it'll be great. And we're providing lunch. So we'll have lunch and it'll be great. So I will do one more question, or actually, oh, thank you for that comment, Sophie. So Denise asks, so this will be our last question, and then we'll kick it to James. Throughout this heavy labor that you do to advance the safety and visibility of Black needs, it is important to take time for yourself. And I'm curious to know from all panelists, what has been a moment of Black joy for you in the work that you do or during Black History Month? I mean, well, I can go first. I mean, I think that moment of that student asking me that question was really cool, because it caught me off guard. The fact they didn't know how to answer that question, I think said a lot. So I was a bit intentional afterwards with like thinking about how I can answer that question going forward. In terms of how I've personally found joy, I love astronomy. I love looking at space and the sky, and I think that's been something that's kind of kept me going throughout this month and has kept me happy. But beyond that, I think just getting to know Ashley and Natalie better has been an amazing experience. Toni Morrison, in her eulogy for James Baldwin, said, "I'm most grateful for our laughter, not because it was all right, but because it was necessary." So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, for me, if the question is about Black joy in this whole work, it's really, for me, in the School of Nursing, seeing the students getting involved in this work. They've been really engaged. But for this particular month, I was really impressed by the February 1st event. I learned a lot, and I left and tried to learn more. So I did some more research on Hogan's Alley, and I just was so proud that, I could learn so much from you, Bashir. That event was really a moment of Black joy for me. So thank you.
I echo what Natalie said. I love being on this panel today, but listening to other panels and the February 1st event was incredible, because that event was very educative. I was learning so much. I brought a notebook to write down, but everything was so fascinating. I felt like I couldn't even find time to write down everything. I also attended 2 events for Black women in leadership. One was BC based, and another one was Black women doing work in kind of the EDI realm across Canada. And both of those were really inspirational. And I think being able to see Black female leaders in different fields was really refreshing and encouraging. And as well, there's been a whole bunch of fun Black History Month events in Vancouver. I hope everyone, or at least some people on this call, were able to attend some. There was a live, there were live artists playing at the Gilton Co. one night. There was a Black queer party one night, just kind of to enjoy life as Black people and to celebrate that Black joy that Denise mentioned. So even, outside of the work we do, or outside of the more formal things we do, there's space for Black joy, and whether that's, listening to artists or dancing around Black queer people. There's ways to really enjoy this month, but enjoy our lives as Black people, which is often surrounded by other Black people. And I would like to echo that, kind of planning this panel event with Bashir and Natalie was really refreshing. And I'm so grateful for the 2 of you and the fun chats. We've laughed, we've talked, we had a really, really great time. And so this in itself has been a true highlight for this Black History Month.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
So we're at the end of our program. I'll pass it to James to give closing remarks. And once James is done with his remarks, you're all free to go and enjoy the winter wonderland that's outside.
Well, thank you, Bashir. And I just want to start by saying good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much, Bashir, Cheryl, Dana Lynn, Sarah. I also just wanted to give a very special thank you to our panelists, Ashley and Natalie. I am very appreciative of you being here and grateful for you for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. I also just wanted to thank everybody who has been here today and participated in this event online, and wish only that we could have been together today. I'm very proud, and we're very proud of the amazing work done by Black faculty, staff, and students in the Faculty of Applied Science. We recognize the barriers, both historical and current, that exist for the Black community in British Columbia, Vancouver, and our campus. These barriers are especially evident in the underrepresentation of Black people within our faculty, within our student body, and in our staff. But I believe that we are all on a journey to move UBC from its history as a colonial and exclusive institution to becoming an anti-racist, multicultural institution that embraces reconciliation. I think we've all started that journey from different places, and I recognize that we're all moving at different speeds. But I'm confident that our goal is the same, and that is to build the individual, the personal competencies that will allow us to create a reflective awareness of our own cultural values and assumptions, and then to commit to personal change, to identify systemic barriers within our institution, and to advocate to make structural changes that remove those barriers. Really, it's about transforming ourselves, the institution, and to transform the world, which is our strategic plan, Transforming Tomorrow. That's why today's event is such an important and impactful part of that journey. Many of you would know that I speak a lot of our strategic plan, but I wanted to say that in particular, our strategic priority of inclusive leadership and respectful engagement is really the articulation of that ambition. And through it, we are striving to make more inclusive spaces so that Black faculty, staff, and students can feel welcome on campus, and we can elevate these voices. As you may know, the EDI and I office here in the faculty throughout February has created several engaging events for Black History Month. We've already mentioned our first initiative, which was an engaging talk on Black Canadian history, and thank you again, Bashir. Our second initiative was on an informative pop-up and virtual museum, and our third initiative is this panel discussion. As we continue on our journey to create an anti-racist, multicultural, inclusive institution and world, we will continue this work throughout the year and ensure we continue to support Black faculty, staff, and students. And I'll just want to, I'm not sure I'm turning it back to Cheryl, but maybe I'll see if she wants to say any last words.
Well, I'll just again thank you, James, for those remarks, and thank the panel. It was an amazing, amazing panel. So I just huge thank you, and virtual claps all around. And you know, the journey continues. So tomorrow's March 1st, but the work continues. So hopefully we'll continue to see you all at our events, and our next one is March 21st. And otherwise, keep getting yourself educated and stay engaged. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I'll see you all around. Hopefully you're not too snowed in by all this weather.